Welcome aboard, my black sheep. Today on The Pirate Therapist, we're sailing straight into the heart shaped waters of mid February to talk about stories that we've been told about love. Valentine's Day didn't start with roses and restaurant reservations, it grew out of ancient Roman festivals, half remembered saints, medieval poetry, and even a whole lot of marketing. Somewhere along the way, a messy mix of myth and history turned into a single loud message. If your love life doesn't look a certain way on this one day, you're doing it wrong. Well, in this episode, we're going to take a look at it. We're going to trace how this holiday has evolved from wild winter rituals and martyr legends into lace covered cards and Instagram posts. And then look at what that story does to our minds. For some people, Valentine's Day is sweet and grounding. For others, it's a spotlight of loneliness, grief, and conflict, and quite often comparison. Well, we're going to talk about both the ways this day can connect us and the ways it can quietly convince us that we're less lovable or less chosen or somehow just behind or not as good. But most importantly, we'll ask how we might rewrite the script. What if Valentine's Day didn't just belong to the couples? What if it became a day to honor all kinds of love, friends, family, and chosen family, even the fragile, hard won relationship you have with yourself? So I'm Lee Perry. I am the pirate therapist. So grab something warm to drink, find a good spot on the deck, and settle in. Let's explore how the history of Valentine's Day collides with our mental health and how we might choose a kinder story for our own selves. Lupercalia is a wild, very old Roman festival that blends myth, purification, and fertility into one dramatic ritual, all centered on the legendary origins of Rome. In Roman tradition, Lupercalia was held every year on February 15th at the Lupercal, a cave at the foot of the Palatine Hill where the she wolf was said to have nursed the twins Romulus and Remus, the future founders of Rome. The festival's name likely comes from lupus, which means wolf, and it was understood as a way to cleanse the city and ensure the health and fertility for the coming year. On the day of the festival, a special group of priests called the Luperci, I think, gathered at the Lupercal cave. They sacrificed one or more male goats, symbolic of fertility, and a dog, and the Vestal virgins prepared sacred salted cakes to accompany the offering. After the sacrifice, two young Luperci had their foreheads smeared with blood from the sacrificial knife, which was then wiped off with wool that was dipped in milk. Tradition required them to laugh at this moment, marking a kind of ritual purification and rebirth. After the feasts, the priests would cut strips of skin called the fibrua from the goats and ran around the Palatine Hill, either naked or nearly naked, striking people, especially women, with these thongs as they passed. Now, being lightly struck was believed to bring purification and increase fertility. So many women would actually seek out the blows in hopes of conceiving or having an easier childbirth in the coming year. Now, the festival tied together several themes: purification of the city and its people at the end of the winter, fertility for the women and their herds and the land, and the connection to Rome's origin story through the cave and the she wolf and the Palatine Hill, where Romulus was believed to have founded the city. Now, the Lupercalia, I'm not sure I'll ever say that right, continued well into the late Roman Empire. Sources mention it's still being celebrated in the 4th and 5th centuries in the Common Era, even after Christianity became dominant. Now, eventually, Christian leaders like Pope Gelasius I moved to abolish it in the late 5th century, condemning it as a pagan and morally questionable rite. Some later writers speculated that its disappearance helped clear cultural space for the later mid February celebrations like Valentine's Day, although that connection is debated by historians. Now, the Lupercalia and Valentine's Day sit near each other on the calendar, but both touch themes of love and fertility, but they come from very different worlds. Over centuries, Christian leaders suppressed Lupercalia and elevated the cult of various Saint Valentines instead. Now, later poets, printers, and businesses slowly turned February into a day about romantic love and then about romantic consumption. So long before the pink candy hearts and, the little chalky ones and the awkward first dates, there was cold stone and animal blood and a cave at the foot of a hill. In ancient Rome, mid February meant Lupercalia. On the 15th, the priests called the Lupercalia would gather at the cave. And again, this is where the she wolf nursed and abandoned the twins Romulus and Remus. To them, this isn't a cute story. It was the wild beating heart of their city's origin story. Now, the goat and the dog were sacrificed there, and the smell of blood and smoke hanging in the winter air. The Luperci smeared the blood on their foreheads, wiping it off, and wearing very little. They would just take these little strips of goat hide, running around, striking bystanders. And they wanted to be touched by these strips because of the health and fertility. It was chaotic and it was physical and it was communal. A city trying to secure its future by reenacting its own wild beginnings. But as the centuries passed, Rome changed. The empire shifted from many gods to one. What had once been sacred began to look suspect to Christian eyes. The nakedness, the sacrifices, the animalistic echoes of the old gods. Church leaders condemned Lupercalia as pagan and indecent. By the late 5th century, the festival was abolished. The date remained, but the ritual that had filled it was gone. In its place, another story slowly took root. The church already honored several martyrs named Valentine, a priest here, a bishop there, men said to have been executed for their faith. Their feast day fell on February 14th. Now, over time, legends grew up around them. Tales of a priest secretly marrying couples against the emperor's orders, a man in prison sending farewell note signed from your Valentine. Whether those stories were historically accurate mattered less than the shape that they gave to the day. It gave courage and love and defiance in the face of power. Now, for a while, the feast of St. Valentine was just that, a saint's day on the liturgical calendar. A real turning point came not from the church, but from poets. Now, in the Middle Ages, writers like Geoffrey Chaucer began to link Valentine's Day with courtly love and with birds choosing mates in the early spring. February 14th became, in verse, the day when creatures paired off, when noble hearts pledged themselves to one another, and from where European aristocrats and eventually ordinary people started treating it as a time to exchange tokens of affection, be that lines of poetry or notes or handmade valentine. The holiday was no longer about priests laughing with blood and milk on their faces. It was about words, about choosing someone, about the fragile thrill of handing a folded message to another person and hoping that they would feel the same. Then came the paper, printing presses, and industrialization. By the 18th and 19th centuries, in Britain and America, people were already sending Valentine's notes, sometimes tender, sometimes teasing, and sometimes anonymous. But in the the mid 1800s, entrepreneurs realized that there was money in this. Lace, embossing, sentimental verses, the mass produced Valentine was born. Instead of one carefully written, handwritten letter, you could buy a beautiful card and let that card's pre printed words do the talking. Each step made Valentine's Day more accessible and more visible. And what had been a personal gesture became a seasonal industry. Candy makers, florists, and jewelers in restaurants, they all found ways to hitch themselves to this holiday and add themselves to the story. If you love someone, the message implied, you show it on this day in these ways. By the 20th and 21st centuries, Valentine's Day had become what most of us recognize now. Shelves of red and pink in every store, reservation only dinners, heart shaped everything. Romantic love, once just one theme among many, moved to the center stage. The holiday's saintly and sacrificial roots blurred into the background. The old winter anxiety about fertility and survival Will our people and our land and our animals, will these all survive? It morphed into a different kind of anxiety. Will I be chosen? Am I lovable? Does my relationship measure up to what people expect? And then, of course, there came social media. Now, on February 14th, our feeds fill with photos, bouquets, chocolates, and elegant meals, declarations of undying devotion, or jokes about singledom. The holiday lives not just in the churches or living rooms, but on screens. In public, Lupercalia's public rituals were about blessing the community's fertility. Our public rituals are about broadcasting our private connections or the lack of them to an invisible crowd. So the story in mid February has shifted layer upon layer from the city's rough plea for fertility and protection to a saint's quiet courage and rumored secret weddings to a poet's imagined day of bird choosing and courtly love to handwritten notes tucked into sleeves to lace covered cards and candy boxes and dinner specials and curated posts that say, "Look, I'm loved. Look, I don't care." Underneath these changes, the themes are strangely consistent: longing paired with fear of loss, the pairing itself, the need to be seen and valued. But the way we perform those needs and the pressure we feel around them has changed dramatically over time. Now, most historians note that there's no clean official decree that Lupercalia is now Valentine's Day, but rather a slow replacement and reinterpretation. Pagan winter early spring rituals are suppressed where Christian feast occupies similar calendar space, and later culture layers romantic symbolism on top. Now, the big differences between Lupercalia and Valentine's Day. Lupercalia was a polytheistic Roman festival tied to Rome's founding myth of Romulus and Remus, and to the pastoral deities focused on purification and fertility for the city and its people. Now, Valentine's Day is a Christian feast day where one or more martyrs named Valentine, later overlaid with secular romantic customs. Today, largely a cultural commercial holiday with thin religious overtones for most people. Now, as far as rituals go, Lupercalia had animal sacrifices, where goats and dogs were sacrificed. Blood and milk rites, feasting priests running around, striking bystanders with strips of goat hide for fertility and purification. Public and physical and chaotic and mostly naked. Now, Valentine's Day is about exchanging cards and gifts, be it flowers, chocolates, jewelry, going on dates, expressing affection verbally or in writing. It can be small or private group rituals, usually restrained and commercial rather than sacrificial. Now, as far as their focus on love, Lupercalia, the focus was on fertility and the protection of women and livestock, not centered on exclusive sentimental romantic pairing in the modern sense. Now, Valentine's Day focused on romantic and sometimes erotic love between couples, increasingly also friendship and self love in some modern reinterpretations. Now, here's the social and psychological impact. Lupercalia reinforced communal identity and shared myth. Everyone participated in a single civic ritual aimed at cleansing and prosperity. From a mental health lens, you could see it as an intense communal outlet for their anxiety about fertility and health and even their very survival. Now, Valentine's Day reinforces specific cultural ideals about romantic success, coupledom, and proper displays of affection. Psychologically, it can support connection and gratitude in some relationships, but it can also intensify loneliness, grief, and social comparison for a single person, those in conflict or those grieving losses. Now, we've moved through bloody festivals where priests ran around with goat skins to bless the city's fertility, to a day where your worth can feel tied to whether you got flowers or a text, or even if you got enough likes on your couple selfie. Both are about love and survival, but they carry very different stories about what we should feel and what we should fear. When we forget that real love involves risk and struggle, we end up judging our relationships and ourselves against something that doesn't exist. That gap between fantasy and reality is where a lot of quiet suffering lives. If the story in your head is love should feel easy, romantic, and affirming most of the time, then a normal relationship starts to feel like a red flag instead of a human moment. Disagreement can feel like proof that you've picked the wrong person instead of a chance to learn how to grow together. Boredom or plateau seasons feel like failure instead of part of a long term connection. Over time, this breeds chronic disappointment. Everyone seems happy, at least everyone else. So, why is my relationship so hard? You're comparing your behind the scenes to other people's highlight reels, and your relationship starts to feel defective when it's actually just ordinary and imperfect. If good love is supposed to look glossy and effortless, then messy parts, the fights, the miscommunications, the mismatched needs, they start to feel shameful. People hide their relationship problems, which cuts them off from support. They tell half truths to friends. We're fine, because they think that the struggle means that they're broken or maybe their partner is broken. That secrecy can increase isolation and keep painful patterns going long past the point of where honest help could have changed things. We also have a fear of vulnerability. Real love involves risk of rejection, risk of being misunderstood, of being hurt, of losing someone. If we forget that, we start believing that if I were doing this right, I wouldn't feel scared or exposed. You might avoid difficult conversations to keep the image of we're good, and you might never show your full self because you're scared that it will ruin the relationship. But on the surface, things look calm, while underneath, there's distance and anxiety. The relationship becomes two curated personas trying to impress each other, not two humans connecting with each other. If you internalize the idea that true love is constant, it's a constant high, it's passionate, it's certainty and dramatic gestures, you might walk away from a solid, caring relationship because it didn't feel like a movie. Don't let Hollywood define what your relationship should look like. Normal fluctuations in attraction, energy, or closeness get pathologized. You chase intensity or constant validation rather than stability and mutual growth. And that could lead to repeated breakups, serial relationships, or staying stuck in situations that are exciting but not healthy because they feel more like the story we've been told, like what we see in the movies. When visible performative love becomes the standard, it's easy to start equating your value with how your relationship looks from the outside. Don't tie your self worth to how Instagrammable your relationship is. On Valentine's Day or anniversaries, you might feel like a failure because there's no big gesture or fancy dinner, or maybe there's nothing there that you feel is post worthy. Single people can feel like they're fundamentally less than because they don't have a picture to prove that they're loved. Well, that can deeply affect a person's anxiety and depression and loneliness, especially for folks already struggling with a sense of self esteem or rejection sensitivity. Most of the things that sustain real love don't photograph well. Honest, awkward conversations, and apologies after you attempt to heal after you've been hurt. Choosing to show up when you're tired and annoyed and maybe even scared. Sitting with someone's pain even when there's nothing you can do to fix it. Just sitting with them, being with them. These are not very social media post worthy things to do, but they're the ones that mean the relationship is real. If you forget that love is these unglamorous moments, you're less likely to practice the skills that matter. That would be communication, healthy boundaries, repair, healing, empathy, patience. You might put more energy into curating appearances than into learning how to navigate conflict and support each other, learning how to communicate even when it's difficult, supporting each other in their mental health struggles. Valentine's culture sells us a picture where love is mostly aesthetics and grand moments, but real love looks more like two people choosing each other through risk and struggle and healing. When we forget that, we don't just feel bad. We miss the chance to build the kind of relationship that can actually hold our messy human hearts together. Looking at Valentine's Day through a mental health lens means asking, what does this day do to people emotionally and why? It can absolutely support connection and joy, but it also reliably amplifies loneliness and grief and comparison and all that adds pressure and it just really crushes people. So I want to look at some other things like joy and rituals and connection. Valentine's Day can genuinely help some people feel closer and more intentional in their relationships. It creates a built in ritual to slow down and say, you matter to me, which many couples and families otherwise forget to do in daily life. These simple traditions, the handwritten notes and the small gifts, having a nice meal, these can boost feelings of gratitude and feelings of security and help you bond. They're very good to protect your mental health. But when we broaden the relationship definition on Valentine's Day to beyond romance, to include friends and children and our families, it can reinforce the idea that love has many forms, not just romantic couplehood, which is mentally healthier than the narrow soulmate or nothing story. Now let's talk about the loneliness and the spotlight effect. Any holiday centered on love will magnify whatever someone is already feeling. People who are single or newly separated or widowed or just lonely often feel like there's a spotlight over their status on this day. The message all around us is everyone is paired up in love and celebrating, and this can deepen feelings of defectiveness and rejection. I can feel like I'm being left out if this is me. For folks with depression or social anxiety, the contrast between how I'm supposed to feel and how I actually feel can really sharpen that hopelessness. If Valentine's Day makes you more aware of who isn't here or what you wish you had, you're not broken. That's a very human response to a very loud holiday. Valentine's is made for social media. That's kind of a mixed bag. People mostly post highlight moments, big gestures, fancy dinner, and elaborate surprises. And we can't continue to put our vulnerable places up against people's highlight reels and expect them to compete. When you're scrolling, it's easy to slide into their relationship is more romantic and more stable and more real than mine. Everyone is loved but me. This fuels the comparison trap, which can increase the low self esteem and the body image concerns and relationship dissatisfaction. Even people in good relationships may feel pressure to perform something post-worthy, turning the day into a test rather than a genuine exchange. Valentine's Day can stir up old pain. It can re-trigger memories of breakups and betrayal and abuse. It can remind us of toxic relationships that perhaps we've been in, especially when the cultural script says today is about romance and safety while someone remembers the opposite. For survivors of intimate partner violence, the focus on couples and the grand romantic gestures can be confusing and painful when those same gestures once accompanied control or harm. For people grieving a partner, the day can sharpen a sense of absence and complicated grief. Valentine's Day can stress out people in relationships too. There's pressure to get it right, the right gift, the right words, say the right thing, go to the right dinner, give your partner the right gift. And this can create an anxiety and conflict, especially if partners have different expectations. Some people use Valentine's Day as relationship barometer. If they don't do X, it means they don't love me, which may not which may or may not reflect on the reality of the day-to-day care. Financial pressure is a stressor that a lot of people feel. Gifts and restaurants and trips, these can strain budgets and create shame if someone can't afford that. They can't compete with these cultural expectations, and that causes a lot of anxiety for some. If you see Valentine's Day as one data point among many, and to talk openly with your partners about what actually feels meaningful versus performative. Let's look at some toxic love narratives. The holiday often reinforces some unhelpful stories, like being in a romantic relationship is proof that you're worthy. Being single means you're failing. Big dramatic gestures equal true love. Whereas, regardless of how you're treated the rest of the year, if your relationship doesn't look like a rom com, then you must be doing it wrong. The effect these narratives can have keep people in unhealthy and abusive relationships because they can adopt the idea that at least I'm not alone on Valentine's Day. It can make people doubt solid, quieter relationships that don't match the Hollywood definition of what Valentine's Day should be. It doesn't match the displayed drama on a Hallmark movie. It can encourage the ignoring of red flags in exchange for attention and validation, especially around Valentine's Day. Now, as my black sheep crew, you can explicitly challenge these scripts and see alternatives. I want you to see love as steadiness, respect, and connection. Don't view the relationship in terms of spectacle. Don't treat your partner or yourself as though this is something that you have to have that is post worthy on Facebook or Instagram. I want you to rewrite the story of Valentine's Day. I want you to take the pen back from the culture and ask, what do I want this day to mean for my heart, for my history, and for my relationships? So here's some ways to do that that you can also weave into your lives. Instead of Valentine's Day being a test about whether you're romantically chosen, reframe it as a day about connection. Include more kinds of love. Celebrate your friends, your children, family members, mentors, your pets. Go to a group of people, your community, whoever they may be. Celebrate with them. Send a text or a card or a voice memo that simply says, "You matter to me because," and then give them why. But make sure you allow yourself to be on this list. Write a short note to yourself about what you've survived and how long you've been going and how much you've grown in the last year. Treat yourself to something gentle, a favorite meal or a good book, or maybe even a movie, as a deliberate act of care and not a consolation prize. Do it because you want to. We want to shift the narrative from am I loved romantically to how am I woven into a web of connection and how can I nourish it? I want you to redefine what counts as love. Instead of judging the day by big gestures, focus on the quieter forms of care. Ask yourself, what actually feels loving to me? Is it a real conversation, being listened to, help with chores, laughing with someone, even just feeling safe? Agree on simple rituals. With your partner, decide together what would feel meaningful and low pressure this year with the two of you. Maybe it's cooking together. Maybe it's writing each other a short note or having a phone free evening. I want you to shift the narrative from love equals expensive, Instagrammable moments to love equals showing up in ways that actually matter to us, that will help us to feel that connection. You can decouple your worth and your relationship health from one day of the year. I want you to decentralize February 14th. If the day is loaded for you, pick a different relationship day or friendship day or a different time in February. Remind yourself one awkward or quiet Valentine's does not define an entire relationship. And it's okay to opt out. Give yourself permission to opt out. It's just a day on the calendar. It's okay to let it just be a normal day. Go to work and do your thing. You don't have to have special plans. You might even create an anti Valentine's ritual with your friends. You can go watch really bad B movies, wear your pajamas, zero pressure. I've known a lot of people who refer to Valentine's Day as Single Awareness Day. It's okay to opt out and not let it be about couples. It really is. I want you to shift the narrative from something's wrong to this is just one moment in a bigger story. I want you to make room for the hard feelings on purpose. Part of rewriting your story is including the parts we usually want to hide. I want you to acknowledge what the day pokes at. This day makes me feel extra lonely, or it reminds me of my ex. It brings up my grief. Name it instead of gaslighting yourself. Acknowledge it, sit with it, accept it, and realize that that's not what defines you. It's something that's happened to you, but sit with it and acknowledge it. If you bury it, it will take root and it will grow into something bigger. I want you to create containers for those feelings. Journal about what Valentine's Day has meant to you in the past. Schedule a call or hang out with someone that you feel comfortable with. Say, look, this day is hard for me without feeling like you need to be fixed. Shift the narrative from I should be happy today to whatever happens is okay. It's just a day and I will get through it. Shift from performance to alignment. Ask yourself what story about love you actually want to live by. And don't let Valentine's Day reflect that. It's not a default script. Some thoughts about alternative story ideas for your life. Love is steady, not flashy. Love includes friends and community, not just romantic couples. Love makes room for healthy boundaries and no, not just sacrifice. Love is compatible with imperfection. None of us are perfect. And if we allow ourselves to acknowledge that we're not perfect, that we make mistakes, that we say the wrong thing sometimes, that is a real genuine part of being human. And when we can acknowledge that and we can accept that not just in others, but in ourselves, we have a much greater chance of having a healthy relationship. But I want you to ask yourself, if I believe this story, how would I treat myself today? What would I say yes to? What would I stop pretending that I enjoy? Shift the narrative from what am I supposed to do to what's true and what is kind for me. I want to give you like a 3-step Valentine's Day reframe, a cognitive reframe, if you will. One, name your old script. For example, Valentine's Day means I'm a failure if I'm alone, or if my partner doesn't do something big, then they don't care. Okay. Is that the script? All right. Acknowledge it. Number two, I want you to write a new story. The new story could be Valentine's Day is a day that I choose to practice kindness to myself, to someone I love, or to someone who might feel unseen. And number three, do one small action that fits into the new story, not the old one. That can be texting your friends, texting someone that you know is having a hard time or who may be by themselves and might be feeling some of that loneliness. Plan a low pressure moment with a partner that feels genuine, where you don't feel like you have to be creating those Instagrammable moments. And I want you to give yourself one concrete act of gentleness. And I want you to allow it to matter, to count to you. That way, instead of Valentine's Day happening to you, it becomes something that you are co writing, you're co authoring. Even if your version is small, quiet, and completely off brand from the commercials, remember, that's kind of the whole idea behind a black sheep is we don't do things the normal way. Now, as we bring the ship back into harbor, here's where we've landed. In mid-February, it has carried many different rituals, from Romans running through the streets with strips of goat skin, early Christians honoring martyred Valentines, medieval poets turning birds and saints into symbols of courtney love, and eventually the modern world covered in pink hearts and pre-printed cards and curated couple photos. All of that history layered together created a loud cultural script about what love is supposed to look like and when it's supposed to show up. Now, for some people, that script feels warm. It's an excuse to slow down and say, I love you, and build small rituals of connection. For others, it feels more like a mirror that they didn't ask for, one that highlights the loneliness, the grief, and the relationship stress, or their inner fear of not being good enough without, if they don't have that picture perfect romance. Well, when we forget that real love is messy and imperfect and sometimes painful, it's easy to judge ourselves and our relationships against a fantasy, and we'll always come up feeling defective in that case. Now, rewriting the story of Valentine's Day doesn't require changing the whole culture. It just means taking the pen back in your own life. You get to decide whether this day is a big deal or just another Friday, whether it's about couples or whether it's about people and creatures who make your life more livable and nicer, whether it's about performance and genuine care, even if that care looks like texting a friend, lighting a candle for someone that you miss, or giving yourself permission to feel whatever you feel. So, in this Valentine's Day season, as it sails on, maybe ask yourself, what story about love do I actually want to live by? And what is one small way that I can honor that story today? Thank you for spending time with me on The Pirate Therapist. I'm Lee Perry. I am the Pirate Therapist. So until next time, may you find kindness in your connections, courage in your loneliness, and a story about love that leaves room for your whole imperfect and very human heart. And remember, you will always have a spot on my crew, and I will save your seat. Until next week.